I don't even know how you would get to write a published book, except that apparently, like, you have to have a big TikTok following. Like, I've heard that's like one of the main criteria for whether or not publishers will work with you as an author, which I guess puts me in a pretty good position for it.
Yeah.
But that's so messed up.
It's so messed up.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do. I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
Hey, it's good to be back. I'm Tim Barnes. You are the genre. And in every episode of this show, I ask a great guest about the first genre that inspired them, the first craft that they pursued, and how they feel about that first pursuit now. And it's all because I believe that line of questioning helps all creative people stay centered and focused on their goals. I know it's been a longish break, but I hope you enjoyed the best of compilations while I was away working on top secret projects and giving my brain a little space to decompress. In this episode, I'm chatting with comedian, filmmaker, and viral digital sketch creator Hoff Matthews. And based on all of those descriptors, I'm sure you can tell that Hoff is talented in a multitude of ways. And he's gone viral on multiple occasions because of a series of videos that he releases in which he is a reporter. Here's a clip from the first one that I saw taking off. He basically inserts himself into actual footage of important people answering questions.
Congressman Santos, we're hearing that the Halloween movie franchise might be rebooted with a new timeline.
I mean, it's the third time. And each time for different reasons, and they just keep going. I don't know. Ask them. I don't care.
Hoff Matthews also frequently presents a series in which he screens a classic horror film and adds sketches in between called Hoff's Horror Fest. I've helped out with quite a few of them, and depending on when you're listening to this, there's actually one that you can see this week, October 15th at the Caveat Theater in Manhattan. And if you go to that event, you might see a little bit of me in there too. Anyway, among the things I talked to Hoff in this episode are what goes into being a digital creator in this chaotic media landscape, how he balances his interest in scary things with his interest in funny things, and most importantly, what's his real name? Please enjoy this conversation with Hoff Matthews. It's possible you're the only fan of this. I'm not saying that what I do is only fans. I'm saying that you're one of the people that I most consistently hear feedback on episodes from.
Hey, look, if there's one fan of You Are the Genre, it's me. If there's no fans of You Are the Genre, I'm dead, right?
But I'm excited because I don't know how long we've known each other. It feels like it's been a while. It's one of those shocking things when you really step back and think about it.
Yeah, it would have been sometime in like the mid to late 2010s that we met.
Yeah, I moved to New York in the summer of 2016 when Barack Obama was technically still president and Stranger Things came out. And we must have met somehow in the comedy scene. It feels like it was before we were both working in the Viacom building in Manhattan.
I think so. I recall meeting you at the Savage comedy show, the stand-up show that I was co-producing at the time. I don't know if that's literally where I first met you, but that
must have been memory. It. That sounds right. Let's go ahead and put that in the history books.
Yeah.
I think that's how history is written.
Yeah, well, it's written by the winners.
And the people who say, that sounds right enough.
Yeah. When you're a winner, you can go by that standard.
But however long we've known each other, I don't know that much about you, which is, I think that will solve all of these mystery boxes in this conversation.
Yeah.
What's your deal? Where are you from and how'd you get to New York?
Sure. I'm from Connecticut originally. And I've lived in the Northeast my whole life. I was in Connecticut, and then I went to college in Boston at Boston University. And then basically the fall after I graduated college, I moved to New York because I'd majored in film and television. So I was originally thinking of moving to LA. And then that summer after graduation, me and some like hometown friends took a couple like day trips into New York. And I had never really had much of a personal connection with it prior to that. I'd been there, but I didn't like think about it that much. But I just loved it so much that I wanted to like at least have lived there for a certain amount of time. So I ended up moving there in the fall instead of LA.
What is Connecticut culture?
Okay, so I've finally, I think, figured this out. The thing that is I don't know if you would call it unique, but unique about Connecticut is that it is the overlap between the tri-state and New England.
Okay.
So it has some of the sort of old-timey rural quaintness of New England, but also a lot of the sort of grime and hustle of the New York area.
Who are some famous people from Connecticut?
John Mayer is from Connecticut.
Oh, wow. Okay, that tracks somehow.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Michael Bolton, I think.
Okay. Writer-wise, for a second, I was like, okay, I can kind of see like a John Updike type writer being from Connecticut.
That's a good... I don't know if John Updike is. I think John Cheever might have lived in Connecticut.
Okay.
The character actor Eric LaSalle is from Bridgeport.
Got it.
If you're familiar with him.
But when you're there, growing up there, did you feel in some way that you're having a sort of all-American experience?
Yeah, I think so. Because I was in a suburb and, part of what's nice about that or this region is that you get all 4 seasons, right? So, you get the nice hot summer and the beautiful fall. And I mean, at least back when I was a kid, the winter with the snow days and everything. So yeah, it did feel kind of, quintessential in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like the fact that, you have a long-standing show called Hoff's Horror Fest, that I know what the answer to the first question of the podcast is. But before I get to that, what is your actual name? I just call you Hoff. And then I'm like, and then I think it's Hoff Matthews. And then I think your email is like even a little different than that, where it's like,
yeah,
Matt Hofferson or something. Like, what is your name?
So, Hoff Matthews is a stage name. My actual name, I guess I'll reveal it on nobody, like you can reveal anything on a podcast. For some reason that never like hurts anybody.
Yeah.
My actual name is Matt Hoffman.
Okay.
It's one letter removed in the spelling from the pro BMX biker Matt Hoffman, which is part of why I changed it for show business.
So how does a decision like that go? Is it like, at what point in your life did you make that choice?
It was in 2012. I officially adopted the stage name, I think on October 30th of 2012. I remember I set that date specifically, and it ended up being right after Hurricane Sandy had hit New York. So I was scrambling to find some open mic that was still operating and, that I could get to in Brooklyn without going over any of the bridges that were closed or whatever. And so at that point I'd been doing stand up for, 2 or 3 years. And yeah, it was partly that my real name is ungoogleable, partly because there's a celebrity already who has it, and also because even apart from that guy, there's just so many Matt Hoffmans in the world.
Yeah.
I literally, the dentist I used to go to would always get me mixed up with a different Matt Hoffman that they had as a patient. So they would be trying to give me x-rays, but I didn't need them because the other guy needed them. So there was just no way to build up, search engine optimization with that name. And the other reason for it was, I was setting up social media accounts and stuff to promote. Well, I didn't even really have anything to promote at that point. Maybe I was doing indie shows and stuff by then, but I wanted to have an online presence that was separate from my personal identity, so that I didn't feel like when I was posting jokes or whatever that I needed to think about what's my family or employers.
Yeah. I mean, that's honestly smart. I feel like you're the beginning of a trend of going back to that. Because when I was in Chicago, there were a few comics, Southside comics, on the, what am I going to say? The black comics. I didn't want to say, I feel like I was about to say urban comedy scene. Who am I? Who they had stage names like Hot Sauce and stuff like that, and then
Earthquake.
Earthquake.
Yeah.
But then I feel like there was a choice for some of the comics when they started to do more stuff on the north side. And I'm saying all this because Chicago is still one of the most segregated cities, but where you have to make you have to have thoughts like that, where it was okay, maybe having a stage name isn't cool on the north side. And so I saw the internal side of that sort of debate. But what you're saying right now feels so important now, as everyone who does comedy has a day job in some way that is not connected to it. And so the fact that you have these 2 identities, that has to make life much easier, where you have a whole other, I'm assuming, LinkedIn reality for Matthew Hoffman.
Yes, Hoff Matthews is not on LinkedIn. He's not a creature of LinkedIn, which is nice to have that as an alter ego. Yeah, I think it doesn't make as much of a difference as it might seem like it would, because I've never made like a big effort to keep the identities that like hermetically sealed off from each other. There's a lot of people I know in my personal life who know that I do comedy and know about the stage name and everything. The stage name is not a persona. It's not like a different character or personality that I take on. It's just like a branding thing.
Got it. Okay. Well, now that we've clarified that, I think we can dive into the first question. What is the first genre that called out to you when you were a kid?
Yes, and I knew that you were going to make an assumption about this, that it would be horror. And I've loved horror since I was a kid, but I think I would say the first genre that I really gravitated towards was parody.
Parody.
In the sort of specific sense of like taking an existing story that people are familiar with and just putting some sort of comedic spin on it. Because I grew up reading Mad magazines, and they of course had Mad Magazine singular, I don't know, and they of course had all of these movie parodies that were just like very straight up, here's the plot of the movie, but with a lot of jokes. But I feel like that was also a format that was used a lot in children's TV programming when we were growing up.
Yeah, the Animaniacs, all that stuff.
Exactly.
It all went over my head, but I couldn't. I still loved it. They found that perfect balance where I didn't know what the Goodfeathers were parodying. Really, I just thought it was funny that there were these gangster pigeons.
Right, exactly. And I think that's how, I and a lot of us got a lot of our pop culture education was through these references that we, didn't have any referential point for at that time. Because they would do that all the time. There would be like, especially in animated shows, I think they would have like, they would just take some story from a movie or whatever and just have their characters doing it. Like there would be a Dexter's Laboratory episode where Dexter gets like locked in the school over Christmas break, and it's like a Die Hard riff where he's trying to get out or something. And The Simpsons, of course. I watch The Simpsons all the time, and they wouldn't usually do full episodes in this mode, but they would have a lot of scenes, or obviously they had like the Halloween episodes where they would kind of work in that format. And it's just had a couple advantages. For one thing, I think it sort of felt like, well, if you're doing parody, then you can kind of do anything, because you can just like take any sort of genre or whatever and then put jokes in it, and now it's parody, now it's the thing I know how to do. And also, once I was like making videos and stuff, the nice thing about parody is it doesn't have to look good or have any professional polish, because you can just say, well, I'm making fun of stuff that's cheesy, so that's why it all looks like crap,
Yeah. Well, I feel like this is interesting coming after this discovery that you have two names. Do you in some way feel like Hoff Matthews is a parody, even though you said it's not too different, it's not like your character or anything, but is it in some way a parody of your actual self?
I think you could say that was the case when I was doing stand-up. And I think, like when you do stand-up, you kind of end up becoming a bit of a parody of yourself, because you have to like kind of deal with what the audience expects from you. So I probably at some point kind of played up my own neuroses and stuff in that format. But it wasn't really like a conscious choice to do that.
And what were those comedic inspirations for you? You loved parody. That's not something that immediately makes someone want to do stand-up. Was there any nervousness around stand-up? Do you feel like that was an end goal for you at some point?
The reason that I got into stand-up was around my senior year of college. I think I realized, I'd been studying film and video, but I realized that to break into the film industry in a creative capacity, at least on the production side, you need to like make short films and get them into festivals and stuff. And it's just so difficult to do that, for one thing, and just in terms of like financing and coordinating a production, and also then to pay all the entrance fees for all these film festivals and, like actually get somebody's attention that way. It felt a lot like, okay, it's just going to be a lot of like putting stuff together and then throwing it down a well and having nothing come out of it, and not even really knowing if you've done a good job or not.
Yeah.
Whereas with stand-up, if you're doing stand-up, kind of by definition, there's an audience there. If you're just alone in your room, like you might practice, but you're not really doing it. But every major city has, open mics where you can go and perform, and they might be awful and give you like a terrible indication of what an actual audience would think and be miserable or whatever. But there's always some sort of audience there, so you can have some sort of barometer for how you're doing. So it was a way to, have a creative outlet that actually felt accessible and connected to the outside world in some way at that time for me.
How often do you do stand-up now? Do you consider yourself someone who's retired from that endeavor?
I'm basically retired. Yeah. I mean, I haven't done it for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
I stopped when the pandemic hit. And then it was sort of like, once it became a matter of having to choose to actively go back to it, rather than just having the inertia of doing it and needing to make the active choice to stop doing it, I was sort of like, I don't know, how am I making any progress in this? Does this actually make sense? Like I did it a handful of times in New York and LA once things opened up somewhat again. But I had this moment where I I went to this mic in LA that was like hosted by this guy I know, was very funny. So I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to do, my type 5 that I've developed in New York and impress everybody and start, making my impression on the LA scene here. And, it was a really big mic with like tons of people, very long, short sets. And I basically bombed, like just didn't get that much of a reaction, which, like, doesn't really mean that much of anything, but it was very frustrating. And I was kind of like pacing around afterwards and stewing and thinking like, maybe if I just said this, or, I could have said this at that time, or if I write more material. And then I just kind of stepped back and was like, or I could just not do this. It's such an addictive form because if you do well, you're like, this feels great. I want to get more of this. And then if you bomb, you're like, I got to redeem myself, And I was like, I just need to remove myself from this cycle.
Yeah, there's all those little things. I used to love before a big show going to anywhere to do stand up and hopefully bombing, because like bombing will give me that armor for the thing I have the actual anxiety for, which is the bigger show. Mm-hmm. So it feels like I have that immediate feeling from yesterday of bombing. So I'm more protected for the big show. So if that sensation pops up, it won't feel as bad, or I know how to push through when something makes me feel a little wobbly on stage. But I asked that question about stand-up because you started off with this interest in parody. It sounds like immediately like there was a filmmaking aspiration connected to it. I identify with that connection. I think if I had any dual lives, it was like I still have different emails and some social media stuff that's faded away, where it was like either some combination of Tim Barnes film / Tim Barnes comedy. Comedy is the like live stand-up objectively in many ways the easiest way to create something, even though there's all of that difficulty attached to it. But that feeling of after the pandemic being like, why am I doing this? But also during the pandemic, the intense quarantine era of it, seeing how important anything in the digital arena suddenly was, it feels like that was an opening for a lot of people. That's certainly how like someone like Z-Way skyrocketed because of that, making the right type of digital interview series at the right time that got enough impact that she got a Showtime show afterwards. Was that a pivot point for you?
That she had her, wow.
When she was, yeah. I remember I was going from a couple 4 years before that. I was co-hosting a live stand-up showcase with her, and then during the pandemic, it was like that's a billboard of her right there. But was that something that made you dive further into creating sketches and things for the web? Because now you have thousands upon thousands of Instagram followers for these hilarious sketches that you do, like mini sketches that involve green screen in a way that I feel like you are the comedic Robert Rodriguez. Take that as 100% of a compliment. I know that.
I do.
I'm saying that you are the Spy Kids of modern comedy.
I love that. I'll be the Shark Boy and Lava Girl of the American comedy scene. But yeah, no, I mean, that really did come directly out of the pandemic, because before the pandemic hit, for I guess a couple years at that point, I had been doing my Hoff's Horror Fest sort of variety show, which you had worked on. where we would like show a movie and I would host, and we would break up the film with, sketches or videos or guest bits related to the movie somehow, sort of in like a late night format. And that was something that I started in 2018 because I specifically wanted to do more like sketch style stuff outside of the stand-up space, stuff that was more produced. And then when the pandemic hit, I switched the show to a live stream format using like public domain movies. And I think it was really instructive to see how useful it was to be able to like put videos together by green screening people into a sketch when they were all actually at their own separate apartments. Because our co-producer Andre Lupalui was doing that a lot. That was like his big thing that he kind of pioneered on that show, was like, I'm just going to like get in touch with a bunch of our funny friends and have them film themselves at home, and then I'll cut it together into a video for the show. And it was really like, oh yeah, like this is something that we can all still do that's also still collaborative under these conditions. And so then from there, I started doing, outside of Horror Fest, like sketch videos in kind of that format, and that led to the stuff that I'm doing now.
So that's where you are now. Let's firmly define where you are now as a creative person. You are on a daily basis, it seems, releasing some form of comedy, video comedy, often as this character who is a reporter, who is inserted into historical and current day situations.
Yeah.
That's where and so you're doing that, and then you're also probably doing some extracurricular things around that. But you have reached what looks like a level of internet fame. Would you describe it that way?
I don't know. I mean, I have, I guess, like a decent micro influencer level following on a couple platforms now, which is cool.
Yeah.
I haven't.
Whoever thought we'd be saying sentences like that? First of all,
yes, we're living in the dystopian future for sure, and we're thriving. I haven't so far seen any like material results from that, really. Like people don't recognize me on the street, or I haven't been like hired for anything out of that. So I would feel, and I also like, I don't know, to me, I feel like internet famous is when you see references to something in all these different places. Like it becomes like a meme on Twitter, or people are like constantly doing like duets with it or whatever on TikTok. Like that, the Kyle Gordon Planet of the Bass video a while back, like that was like inescapable, like even if you hadn't seen it originally, you would just keep seeing people's riffs on it. And I've never seen that with me. I've never seen any like references to me outside of my own feed or whatever. So I don't feel famous.
You don't feel famous. Is the internet element of it something that you care about deeply?
What do you mean?
Like the fact that you've reached a status that many would hope for on the internet on certain platforms, yet you haven't reached the stratosphere. Does that make you want to like learn everything about all the different algorithms and all the things you could do? Similar like when you were first doing stand-up, if you ever had the goal of doing a stand-up special, are you pouring some of that energy into the internet?
I'm sure not as much as I should be. I have, a certain sense of like, oh, there's certain things that you're supposed to do to make videos perform better or whatever. I don't keep up with that as much as I probably should. And I also like, when I started doing these mini sketch videos, I was like straight up unemployed. So I had like a lot of time on my hands, and now I'm still underemployed, but I have like actual work. So instead of like doing everything I can to put this stuff together, it's really like I gotta just keep myself, above water at a certain baseline, I guess.
Yeah, but you aren't pacing around saying this didn't get 100 likes. Maybe next time, the way you're doing at that last stand-up show, you're maybe next time I can do this, this, and this, and you don't have that same anxiety bubbling up because of things that don't hit as well as something you posted yesterday, for instance.
Well, I think it depends on how my content is performing. I think if I hit a stretch of like a few weeks or so where I feel like nothing's really been hitting, then I get somewhat concerned and feel like I need to make some sort of changes. But as long as there's like a rhythm to it where there's like some regular pops, it feels okay, I guess.
Okay, so that's where you are now. I asked that because I'm going to ask how you got here. What was the first official craft that you pursued? I mean, in some ways you could say stand-up was the first official craft, but how do you really feel about that question, the answer to that?
I would say it was fiction writing. I think that was really the creative pursuit that I first
Very Connecticut of you. I'm getting this feeling that there are a lot of creative writers in Connecticut for some reason.
Yeah, I was writing about the banal desperation of my suburban community. No, I was writing like Goosebumps ripoffs, but that was like, the first craft that I kind of took seriously as a kid and imagined as a future career.
In terms of like novel writing, or was it sort of like short stories?
I was writing short stories at that time. I mean, I probably imagined that I might write novels at some point, but that's what it was then, yeah.
And you described them as Goosebumps knockoffs. In what way? Like they were like young adult focused, or apparently Goosebumps was a major influence, and you feel as though the things you were writing were like on that caliber, which is a great caliber. I love R.L. Stine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was all about like all those, Goosebumps, scary stories to tell in the dark, scary stories for sleepovers. We had so many great series when we were kids. And yeah, I mean, they were like Goosebumps-ish in that there was a lot of like spooky horror stories of some sort involving kids going on some sort of spooky adventure. And then some of them were also more comedic because it was, again, I think it was just easier for me to not worry a whole lot about tone. But yeah, just in terms of the content, that's really like where most of it was.
What was your consistency of writing these short stories?
That's a good question. I mean, I was probably writing like several a year for a while, but I don't really remember at this point.
And do you feel like there's any connective tissue between your love of parody and your interest in writing fiction like this?
I think I didn't really think about it that way at the time. Like when I was a kid, I would do, some parody type stuff in terms of fiction writing, or eventually in terms of like videos I was making, or even like drawings or like little comic books I was doing. But I would also do stuff that like was just basically serious as much as something made by a 10-year-old can be, like not intentionally trying to be funny. And even when I was in high school, I did like a half-hour horror short called Jason versus Michael that was like Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers from the Friday the 13th and Halloween movies fighting each other, which was like stupid, but it wasn't trying. Actually, in the big advance of that video, the way it was a big step forward for me was that I was like, all right, this is going to be the video where we're not trying to make it stupid. If it's stupid, that's just because we have limitations in our resources and our skills. But we're at least going to try within, what we have available to us to like to maintain continuity and have like actual performances and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Don't scroll away. You Are the Genre. We'll be right back after the break. Here I am in the middle of the show to remind you that You Are the Genre is an independently produced podcast, which means that I do this for the love of great conversation and also the enjoyment of bringing those conversations to you. If you'd like to support the podcast in any way, you can do so by subscribing to the newsletter associated with it. You can find a link to that at youarethegenre.com or in your show notes. You can subscribe for free, or you can upgrade to a paid subscription, which gives you advanced episodes of You Are the Genre before anyone else gets to listen to them, plus so much more. I typically use this space in the middle of the show to talk about something that I've simply been enjoying. And one of those things is a film that I got to see. I went to a screening of this film called Nickel Boys. It's a film adaptation of a Colson Whitehead novel, and it really blew me away. It lingered in a way that no other movie has for me before. And again, speaking of movies, you can go to Hoff's Horror Fest October 15th at the Caveat Theater in Manhattan. All right, so there you have it. Check out Nickel Boys. Go to Hoff's Horror Fest and subscribe to the You Are the Genre newsletter. And if you want to do that, get all of the information you need at youarethegenre.com. Now, back to the episode. Where were we? It sounds like we have a mutual love of repetition, because in stand-up, you're repeating the phrases, you're learning and repeating. You're learning and repeating the phrases, body movements, and you're repetitively going out to do this thing over and over again for the hope that you can basically become a an animatronic who can riff every now and then,
Yeah.
who can meet the moment. And then the same thing with short stories, and same thing in a way with like sort of short sketches and things like that. Does that cycle happen in other aspects of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a comfort for me in the idea that, like, if you do something enough, you'll see results from it. That, like, you don't need to necessarily concern yourself with innate talent or where you're at, in the present moment, if you are disciplined enough to just keep plugging away. And that's more true for some things than it is for others, but it's a nice feeling for me because I feel like I generally have the discipline to do that, even if in some areas of life I might not have a whole lot of natural aptitude.
Yeah. Do you at times feel a little insane because of that? I feel a little insane because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can come off a little insane sometimes, but I feel like usually it's like it comes off as good-natured eccentricity most of the time.
Trying to connect more dots. The last question of this podcast is, how do you feel about that first pursuit now? How do you feel about this initial pursuit of being a horror writer in the prose form?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm happy to have moved more into comedy. I think it can be a very like liberating genre or form to work in, and I feel like a lot of like serious toned stuff that I've done in my life, I sort of look back and I'm like, I didn't really know what I was doing or why I was doing it. I was just kind of imitating stuff that I had seen, whereas with comedy I feel like I can be somewhat more intentional with it. But I do somewhat miss the work of prose writing in the sense of, that it's just very like bearing down intellectually on what you're doing. And there's almost no like logistical aspect to it. It's just all like mental creation. Like that takes a certain degree of discipline that I don't always have in some of the stuff that I do now.
Yeah, I'm reminded that like, oh yeah, this is why I created the show, because I do have, similar to every single guest, all of these free floating pursuits. And I've kind of gotten back to my vague interest in writing prose. And what's been helping lately is just like writing down random sentences in a physical notebook that I keep in my pocket, which as I started doing this, I was like, oh yeah, I used to do this for stand-up as well. It's the exact same thing. And doing stand-up and writing short stories, there is a hope and a joy in that you're doing something that is objectively so simple, yet just by doing this, you have created the full thing. Compared to writing a screenplay or a pilot script, when you write a short story, sure, it can go down a path of being produced, but just by it existing in that way, it is a fully formed product. Doing stand-up, just by doing that on stage, that is a fully formed thing that happened in the world. And now, with the speed of technology and everything, you are making fully formed visual sketches and putting it out there in a complete form. But I guess at the same time, and this is what we tend to talk about on our rare kind of walk-in talks, there are these... they don't feel tangible at the end of the day. There's a difference between putting a sketch on the internet and going to a short film festival or something where you watch a bunch of completed things with an audience of people. What is your feeling towards that? Is a part of that your end goal? What is your end goal with everything that you're doing right now, I guess is the question. Yeah,
I mean, I think my goal with it, there's different goals to it. Like partly it's to just raise my own profile to the point where, for one thing, ideally I could get employed somewhere doing something along these lines. And also just to feel like what I'm doing creatively is making some sort of impact on people. I mean, that's, there's an idea when you're doing creative stuff that you want to get successful or that you want to like blow up because you want to be making money at it, which is true. But I think it is also like people seek that success because part of the creative impulse is like communicative, and you want to be, your consciousness to be having an effect on other people's consciousnesses, and ideally like helping probably in some small way to like have people see the world a bit more like you do, and thereby make the world a bit more friendly for you, I guess.
Isn't it funny that it's not as simple as describing, the effect of performing in front of a live crowd? You're describing what you're doing on TikTok videos as trying to connect your consciousness with other people's consciousnesses, and you're never going to see them. You're never going to know the context of them watching it. That's another part of the big shift is, when it was televisions, you knew for the most part that people were watching this in a living room. When it's TikTok, they could be in the bathroom. They could, like anything could be going on in terms of how they're watching the thing that you made.
I mean, but I think, stand up, it is the same thing. It's just, it's on a smaller, more immediate scale, which has its own like rewards and challenges to it. But I guess like, I don't know if I'd made the connection before, but I think making these videos is for me somewhat similar to stand up and also like fiction writing, in the sense that I can feel like it's something I have control over. And I guess unlike fiction writing, that I have some sort of audience for, even if it's small or I don't see them or I don't totally understand how it works.
Yeah. And that has to be very freeing. And I think, a part of the freedom, sorry, I feel like this is my first time talking to someone who does what you do. Essentially, even though it's not just TikTok, and I have done elements of this too, but I'm just trying to like, what are we doing? But there was a time where, the types of stuff that you do, you would only mainly see it on a late night show, and there was a meeting involved. But now you have everything at your disposal to do this on your own. And one of my favorite sketches you did was where you found some footage of Kamala Harris doing some live interview, and then all of a sudden, the person she's talking to is you as an alien. And like so many things must get triggered. And I've been in some of your sketches, and I go to your living room, there's a green screen, and I'm just helping you bring to life these connections, these synapses that came together. And I don't know, I guess the fact that there isn't, outside of me being the actor, you're writing, directing, editing this, the fact that there aren't more people involved kind of does make it feel like, oh, I've been dropped into your consciousness here, like specifically your world. Yeah,
that's it's flattering and frightening, I guess. There's a lot of responsibility in that,
and it feels like that is like the last step before whatever is going on with AI, right? Because I see these things popping up where it's like an AI trailer of Donald Trump as Forrest Gump. And I know that someone must have written something, but that's if this one person had this idea, wrote a few things, had to mold the AI in certain ways, but the fact that they didn't even have to find a me to show up to their living room to be on a green screen, like,
yeah,
are you willing? I don't know what I'm asking, but I guess I did get the answer, which is that you're kind of freaked out by an element of this.
Yeah, but I mean, it partly came out of the fact that I was laid off from my job at the end of 2022, and then found that it was extremely difficult to get another job because the film and TV and video industry has been going through just this extreme contraction for the last couple of years, which I feel like is now finally being kind of reported on and understood in larger media. So it was, I think I felt like I really needed to have something that was like entirely within my own control, because everything that would have been in a position of controlling me had just like lost interest in me whatsoever, So yeah, I needed to do it myself.
Yeah. And it feels like you have fully accomplished an element of all the things that inspired you. You're making parodies on a daily basis. Sometimes the angle of this parody, something that is is on something that's currently happening in the news, and it can have a horror or science fiction bent to it, like when you're the alien interviewing Kamala Harris. Do you feel good about that? Like, are you able to accept that? Like, oh, I'm kind of at a pretty good state with all of this. When you look back at the childhood, whoever you call your childhood self, Hofferson, is that child version of yourself pleased?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think he and I would probably rather have an actual job in some capacity, but other than that, yeah, I think he'd get a kick out of what I'm doing.
Yeah, and you're carving whatever the next version of jobs are. I mean, we're just 10 years away from requiring universal basic income because of whatever, or we're going to have our consciousnesses doing all of the work. It's basically going to be like Severance, it feels like. So you're part of the new path, Hoff.
I hope so.
You're defining the future of comedic work. All you need is a brand deal. I feel like you just need to get Liquid Death to pay you to put a can in every sketch.
I'd work with Liquid Death. You know, it's fun packaging on the cans. Works with my off-kilter sensibility.
And I've spoken with a few people about this connection between scary stuff and funny stuff. It feels like you very easily bridge the two. Are you able to wax poetic about what unites the two genres?
Yeah, I think to some extent what unites them is maybe a feeling of powerlessness. I mean, I definitely think that that's key to a lot of horror. And I think it's very important to comedy also to sort of feel like you're in a position of observing a completely insane situation or world that you can't really do anything about it. So you gotta laugh, right? I mean, that's what they say. Obviously everybody says like they also depend very heavily on timing, a good scare and a good laugh or whatever are very sort of similarly structured in that sense. But yeah, I think a lot of it is a feeling of just being on the bottom looking up in a way.
I like everything that you're doing. It feels like you're carving a very specific niche. I'm just curious, do you feel like you're not, are you disinterested in writing short fiction and things like that? Do you have the active pursuit of making a feature film, that kind of thing? Or is that kind of like you're thinking about the practical stuff now and all that kind of stuff is bubbling, within you?
I think my creative dream at the moment would be to make a feature film in the sort of style that I've been developing, that I think you see in other places too, of everything being kind of rudimentarily composited together in a way where it's not like realistic special effects. It's very clearly like fake and sort of cartoonish in a way, but that's kind of intentional and factored into the overall like aesthetic sensibility, I guess. Like the film Hundreds of Beavers is very sort of similar in that way, and I thought that was really great. Are you making
things up? I've never heard. There's a film called Hundreds of Beavers?
Yeah, it's a indie comedy made by people in Wisconsin, I think, that came out like this year or maybe the end of last year. I might have been playing some festivals and stuff. But yeah, it's this guy in like 19th century Wisconsin or Canada or something. It was like a fur trapper. So he's just like trying to catch as many beavers as he can. And the beavers are all played by people in kind of like stupid costume shop beaver costumes. And a lot of it is like people, green screened into these environments or whatever. And then they get into these really crazy, like Looney Tunes, wacky set pieces. It's really, really good. I think it might be streaming somewhere now. So you should definitely check it out.
Pornhub?
Yes, it's very, very arousing. It's a very erotic.
It's one of the top searches.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, they have a whole tab for that. But I saw that and I was like, yeah, this is definitely like along the lines of what I feel like I've been trying to put together, because outside of the press conference videos, which have been my biggest thing for a while, I have also done stuff where I've been trying to kind of build out a bit more of a world using like stock imagery. And you were in a short film that I did, which I still haven't like put online or anything, called It's a Living, where it was really like just every environment was artificial in some way. I would love to like do something in that format on a larger scale. And I mean, creatively, there is definitely an appeal to me about, writing a novel or whatever. But for one thing, I haven't been working in that medium at all for a really long time. And also, that does kind of get back to my thing about when I do creative stuff, like I am trying to get an audience. And I don't mean it in a cynical way in the sense of like, I'm just trying to figure, I don't care what it is. I'm just going to do whatever, the people will pay me for, but just like, I'm creating stuff that I want people to see. And so I want there to be like, I want it to be able to find people or people to be able to find it. And I just don't feel that about like prose fiction for the most part. I feel like so much of that is just its own little world of, academics or whatever. And it so rarely filters into the larger culture. And I don't even know how you would like, I don't even know how you would get to write a published book, except that apparently like you have to have a big TikTok following. Like I've heard that's like one of the main criteria for whether or not publishers will work with you as an author, which I guess puts me in a pretty good position for it.
Yeah.
But that's so messed up.
It's so messed up. And I personally kind of circle back to an interest in writing fiction for the page where that's the final product. But I also feel like I'm frustrated by the fact that no one is seeking out the tangible thing. Like if I get something in something, it'll be on a website and it'll be scrollable, but I will have no confidence that people are actually engaging with it in the same way that reading something on paper feels like that best type of daydreaming while staring at the ceiling. like it feels like someone is actually like ingraining that into their life. And I love that feeling. But something that you did when we both had short films in, what was the name of that show?
Tootsie's Video Vault.
Tootsie's Video Vault. You made something that broke the mold by engaging the audience. I forget the exact premise, but it was a very straightforward short where you are, again, this character that you've developed who's like a journalist / news anchor, and it worked. The audience was totally engaged, and it wasn't 3D, but it broke the fourth wall, so to speak. And it feels like that's what you're talking about. You want to be able to, you want to engage with the audience in the fullest way possible through a form where it feels like that wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, I guess it was the original Megalopolis. I hadn't made that connection until now, but I was pioneering that technology. Yeah, no, I mean, I do think that art should be as participatory as possible, I guess, that it shouldn't be something that people just passively consume and forget about. It should like inspire them to do something or think about something, or it should like kind of, spark them in some way, which doesn't have to be like really like, highfalutin or whatever.
Yeah.
But, even just in the sense of like making music that people can dance to, or putting it in a context where people can like make it a social thing, I think is valuable.
Well, yeah, some of the best jokes on the internet are ones that feel like an inside joke at an actual party because it's referencing something that is already floating in the feed, but you aren't setting it up like a late night joke where you're saying this plus this punchline. You're commenting on something that is just floating in the air, and then it spreads like wildfire. Are you able to find ways on the internet exclusively that kind of do the exact same thing you did at that film festival that where you had that thing that involved the audience? Is there any way to do that?
Well, I mean, I think, social media sites have a certain inherent dimension of that because they have the comments section. They have the ability for people to like share something themselves. So there's already kind of a participatory aspect built in. And, in terms of just straight up jokes, like tweets mainly, I guess. Yeah, there's that element of sometimes there's this topic that's on everyone's mind and you can create something that taps into that, but also it can work the reverse way where, so many people have written just a single, one-line text joke on Twitter that was so great that it became like a common phrase or just a shorthand for an idea, and it's really like helped the hive mind grow.
Like humble brag. Humble brag started that way.
Yeah, milkshake duck.
Yeah. But wait, this isn't over yet, because I realized that we haven't even touched on family at all in this entire conversation. One of the rare conversations where that hasn't come up at all. How does your family feel about everything that you're doing?
They're very supportive. My dad is very much the type who's always had like a whole bunch of kooky creative pursuits of his own. So,
but how did I miss this? What kind of stuff? What are your dad's kooky pursuits?
Mainly music these days. I mean, he's been like writing songs and performing in bands at least since the 80s, maybe late 70s. And he has his own band right now, which, they play around Connecticut sometimes, and they're working on a new album. But he's also like, throughout his life, he was a journalist for an alt weekly paper in Connecticut. He would write stories for them. He's like drawn comic books. He's like known as a polymath, this person who like does everything kind of.
Got it.
And my mom is like, does not tend to like actively follow creative pursuits to that same extent, but she also like is supportive of the stuff that I do.
Okay, so you aren't molded in some factory or dropped from space in some alien egg.
Not that I know of.
You are, but you are a very diligent person, and someone who I can see being on a Star Trek bridge, doing very important work. So I appreciate everything that you do. Thank you for joining me on the podcast and for breaking the dry spell. You're going to be the first episode back from my hiatus after 30 plus episodes, if you are the genre.
Wow, it's an honor.
And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And that's the show. Big thanks to Hoff Matthews for joining me on the podcast. For more information about him, just follow Hoff Matthews at various places online. He's also got a Patreon at patreon.com/Hoff Matthews. Freddie Nunez created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song, and Adam Smith produced it. Next episode, I'm chatting with playwright and novelist Claire Willett. But if you become a paid subscriber to the newsletter, you can listen to that a week ahead of the normies. This is Tim Barnes signing off with your weekly reminder that you are the genre.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically make you